December 16th, 1944. The Ardennes Forest. Private First Class. Thomas Randall crouched in the biting cold, his breath forming ghostly clouds in the frigid air. The distant rumble of German artillery had fallen silent, but that silence concealed a more immediate danger: night patrols moving through the forest. Randall's unit, the 101st Airborne Division, had been ordered to maintain fixed positions and conserve ammunition. Standard protocol dictated limited engagement after dark. Visibility 0, command had reported. Hold positions until daybreak. But Randall knew something his commanders didn't. For 3 weeks, he had been secretly modifying his scope with a contraption that violated every regulation in the field manual. Using salvaged aircraft parts, a flashlight battery, and phosphorescent paint he'd taken from abandoned German equipment, Randall had created what his fellow soldiers mockingly called his owl eyes, a crude but effective night vision enhancement that allowed him to see thermal signatures through his scope. Battalion Command had explicitly forbidden unauthorized modifications to standard-issue weapons. The penalty could be court-martial. But as Randall detected movement 300 yards ahead, German reconnaissance units probing for weaknesses in the American line, he made the decision that would alter the course of the battle and possibly the entire campaign. "I can see them," Randall whispered to his spotter, Corporal James Winters. "They're moving toward Baker Company's position. At least 20 men." Winters shook his head. "You can't possibly see anything in this darkness." Command said to hold fire. In that moment, Randall knew Disobeying could end his career or save hundreds of sleeping American soldiers from being slaughtered in their foxholes. The Germans were using the cover of darkness to infiltrate American positions before launching their massive counteroffensive at dawn. With trembling fingers, he adjusted his forbidden device and took aim at the invisible enemy. Thomas Randall was born on April 12, 1923 in Clearwater, Minnesota, a small farming community where winter temperatures routinely plunged to 30 below zero. The youngest of 4 children, Randall grew up hunting white-tailed deer with his father, often before dawn or after dusk when the animals were most active. By age 12, he could track and shoot a deer in near darkness, developing an almost preternatural ability to detect movement in low-light conditions. His father, William Randall, had served in the trenches during World War I and returned home with both physical and psychological scars. "War is nothing but waste," he told his sons. "Men dying for ground that doesn't matter, following orders from officers who can't see what's happening." Despite this, when Pearl Harbor was attacked, Thomas enlisted immediately, believing that this war, unlike his father's, had clear moral purpose. During basic training at Fort Benning, Georgia, Randall's marksmanship scores were the highest in his company. His drill instructor, Sergeant Maxwell, recognized his talent immediately. "Most men shoot where a target is," Maxwell noted in his evaluation. "Randall shoots where a target will be." This uncanny predictive ability, combined with exceptional patience and steady hands, made him a natural candidate for sniper training. In sniper school, Randall's unusual background became both an asset and a liability. His hunting experience gave him advantages in fieldcraft, but his independent nature made him resistant to military discipline. He questioned instructors about standard-issue equipment, suggesting modifications based on his civilian hunting experience. This earned him the nickname Professor among his peers, not entirely affectionately. "The kid can shoot," his marksmanship instructor reported, "but he doesn't understand that war isn't hunting. In war, you follow orders, you use standard equipment, and you don't improvise unless you're ordered to." Randall struggled with this philosophy. In hunting, adaptation and improvisation were virtues. If something didn't work, you fixed it. If conditions changed, you adjusted. The rigid adherence to protocol seemed counterproductive, especially when lives were at stake. Nevertheless, he graduated in the top 3 of his class and was assigned to the 101st Airborne Division in September 1944. His integration into the unit was rocky. Most of the men had fought together in Normandy and Operation Market Garden. They viewed replacement troops with suspicion, especially ones with specialized training who hadn't proven themselves in combat. Randall's habit of tinkering with his equipment didn't help matters. "Here comes the professor with another one of his crazy ideas," became a common refrain when he approached his squad leader with suggestions for improving their effectiveness. His immediate superior, Staff Sergeant Miller, was particularly resistant. "The Army has spent millions developing this equipment," he'd say. "You think you know better than the entire United States Ordnance Department?" Randall would often reply, "I know what works in these conditions," which didn't endear him to the chain of command. By December 1944, Randall had participated in several combat operations, distinguishing himself with 13 confirmed enemy kills. His accuracy was unprecedented, but his methods remained unconventional. He preferred to operate alone or with a single spotter, often choosing positions that seemed unnecessarily exposed but provided better fields of fire. He experimented with camouflage techniques not taught in training, incorporating local materials that better matched the specific terrain. These successes earned him grudging respect from his fellow soldiers, but continued skepticism from officers who viewed his innovations as potentially dangerous departures from tested tactics. What no one knew was that Randall had been working on his most radical modification yet, one that would soon become both his greatest violation of protocol and his most significant contribution to the war effort. The Ardennes offensive, which would later become known as the Battle of the Bulge, represented Adolf Hitler's last desperate attempt to split the Allied forces in northwest Europe and perhaps force a negotiated peace. The Germans had assembled 25 divisions, approximately 250,000 men, for a massive surprise attack through what Allied commanders considered an unlikely route, the dense, hilly Ardennes forest in Belgium and Luxembourg. The American forces holding this sector were spread thin. The First Army had placed inexperienced divisions there to gain combat experience in what was considered a quiet sector, while veteran units were rested and refitted. The terrain itself was considered a natural barrier to major offensive operations, especially in winter. Dense forests, narrow roads, and steep ravines made it difficult to move large formations of troops and tanks. On December 16, 1944, the Germans launched their offensive with a massive artillery barrage, followed by infantry and armored attacks all along the front. The Americans were caught completely by surprise. Poor weather grounded Allied aircraft, eliminating their air superiority. Fog and snow limited visibility, allowing German units to advance undetected. In some sectors, entire American companies were overrun before they could organize an effective defense. The 101st Airborne Division, to which Private First Class Randall belonged, had been refitting in France after Operation Market Garden when they received emergency orders to move to Bastogne, a critical road junction in Belgium. They arrived on December 19th as German forces were encircling the town. The division commander, Brigadier General McAuliffe, organized a perimeter defense, but the situation was precarious. The Germans held overwhelming numerical superiority. Against the 17,000 airborne troops defending Bastogne stood elements of 5 German divisions, including the elite 5th Panzer Army, nearly 50,000 men with tanks, artillery, and air support. The Americans were low on ammunition, medical supplies, and winter clothing. Many soldiers suffered from trench foot and frostbite in temperatures that hovered around 10 degrees Fahrenheit. Communication was sporadic. Radio equipment frequently malfunctioned in the cold, and German units had infiltrated American lines, cutting telephone wires and ambushing messengers. Units often operated with limited information about adjacent positions or enemy movements. It was in this context that night operations became critically important. The Germans, desperate to capture Bastogne before Allied reinforcements could arrive, conducted extensive night patrols to probe for weaknesses in the American perimeter. Standard doctrine for both sides dictated limited engagement after dark. Without specialized night vision equipment, which wouldn't be widely deployed until decades later, soldiers relied on flares and starlight for visibility, making accurate fire nearly impossible. The American forces had strict orders: conserve ammunition during the night, report enemy movements but avoid engagement unless directly attacked, and wait for daylight to conduct offensive operations. These orders made tactical sense given the technology available, but they gave the initiative to the Germans, who used darkness to maneuver with relative impunity. For Randall, these restrictions were increasingly frustrating. His pre-war experience had taught him that darkness could be an advantage to the hunter who knew how to use it. He had been conducting his own experiments with various materials to enhance night visibility, and by mid-December he believed he had developed a workable solution. The question was whether he would be permitted to use it, or whether he would have to disobey direct orders to prove its effectiveness. The regimental commander, Colonel Robert Sink, had established clear protocols. "We cannot waste ammunition firing blindly into the darkness. Every bullet must find its target. At night, our job is to observe and report. Engage only when the enemy is within 50 yards and directly threatening your position." These orders would soon be tested, as the Germans prepared for a major night infiltration that could potentially break through to Bastogne's vulnerable supply depot, a development that would likely mean defeat for the surrounded Americans. The temperature had dropped to 7 degrees below zero as darkness fell on December 20th. Randall and Winters were positioned on a wooded ridge overlooking a shallow valley, where intelligence suggested German units might attempt to move artillery pieces forward under cover of darkness. They had been in position since 1400 hours, carefully concealing their location and establishing multiple escape routes in case they were discovered. Their orders were explicit: observe and report any enemy movement, but do not engage unless directly threatened. Battalion headquarters was 5 miles behind them, and radio contact was sporadic due to the weather conditions and German jamming. At 1900 hours, Randall detected the first signs of movement. Unlike other snipers, who relied primarily on sound at night, Randall had been systematically scanning the valley through his modified scope. The device he had created was crude by later standards, but revolutionary for 1944. Using phosphorescent paint salvaged from German aircraft instruments, Randall had created a luminous coating on specialized filters that attached to his scope. The paint contained radium compounds that glowed when exposed to minimal light. He had discovered that this glow, when properly filtered, could detect the heat signatures of bodies moving against the colder background of snow and trees. The effect was amplified by a small battery-powered ultraviolet light source, cannibalized from a signal lamp, that he had mounted alongside his scope. The result wasn't true night vision, as modern soldiers would understand it, but rather an enhanced ability to detect thermal contrasts in near-total darkness. The modifications violated at least 7 regulations regarding the handling of standard-issue equipment and potentially exposed their position due to the faint purple glow visible only at very close range. "I've got movement," Randall whispered. 11 o'clock, approximately 300 yards, a column of men moving slowly up the ravine. Winters, who couldn't see anything through his standard binoculars, was skeptical. "Are you sure? I don't hear anything." "They're being careful." Moving 5 meters, then stopping to listen. Classic infiltration technique. Randall continued, tracking the nearly invisible figures. "I count 23 personnel. They're carrying something heavy, probably machine guns or mortars." Winters reached for the radio. "I'll report it. Baker Company needs to know they've got company coming." The radio crackled with static as Winters attempted to make contact. After 3 attempts, a faint voice responded, "Lightning 6, this is Baker Actual, report unreadable. Say again, over." Winters tried once more, speaking slowly and clearly. "Baker Actual, this is Lightning 6. Enemy patrol, approximately platoon strength, moving toward your position from the northeast ravine. Estimate they will reach your perimeter in 30 minutes, over." The response was immediate and frustrating. "Lightning 6, maintain observation. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage. We have no confirmation of enemy movement in that sector. Flares report negative visibility. Hold position and continue monitoring. Out." Winters set down the radio with a curse. "They don't believe us. Without visual confirmation from multiple sources, they won't wake the company." Randall continued tracking the German patrol through his scope. They were moving with practiced efficiency, clearly elite troops familiar with night operations. At their current rate, they would reach the sleeping American company in less than 20 minutes. Baker Company had set up defensive positions, But their focus was on the main road, not the ravine that the Germans were now using to bypass their perimeter. "They'll be massacred," Randall said quietly. "The Germans will be inside their lines before anyone realizes what's happening." Winters nodded grimly. "I know, but orders are orders." "We report. We don't engage unless directly threatened." Randall made a quick calculation. The German patrol was 300 yards away, an extremely difficult shot in daylight, nearly impossible in darkness. With his modifications, he believed he could hit a man-sized target at that range, but doing so would reveal their position. More significantly, it would be a direct violation of standing orders. "They've got a radio operator with them," Randall observed, "and what looks like an officer leading the patrol. If I take them out, it might disorganize them enough to buy Baker Company sometime." Winters shook his head firmly. "Absolutely not. That's a negative, Randall. We have explicit orders. Breaking radio silence with unauthorized fire could compromise the entire sector. Every German artillery spotter for miles will zero in on our position." Randall was silent for a long moment, watching as the German patrol navigated expertly through the darkness. They were now 250 yards away and moving more confidently, having encountered no resistance. Through his scope, he could see that several soldiers were carrying what appeared to be flamethrowers, weapons that would be devastating against the wooden bunkers where Baker Company had established their command post. "James," Randall said quietly, using his spotter's first name, "there are 217 men in Baker Company. If those Germans reach their position undetected, how many do you think will survive?" Winters didn't answer immediately. As a veteran of Normandy, he had seen entire units wiped out due to failures in early warning. Finally, he said, "It's not our call to make, Tom. The chain of command exists for a reason. Because officers 5 miles behind the lines know better than the men who can actually see what's happening," Randall countered, echoing his father's words about World War I. Through his scope, Randall could now clearly identify the patrol leader, a tall officer wearing the distinctive uniform of the Waffen-SS. The man moved with confidence, occasionally consulting a map and giving hand signals to his patrol. This was not a random probe, but a carefully planned operation with a specific objective. Winters tried the radio once more. "Baker Actual. Urgent update. Enemy patrol has flame weapons and is now 250 yards from your northeast perimeter. Please acknowledge, over." The radio remained silent for 30 seconds, then crackled with the same response. "Lightning 6, maintain position. Visibility negative in all sectors. No confirmation of enemy movement. Out." Randall made his decision. "I'm taking the shot." "Randall, don't. If I'm wrong, I'll face court-martial. If I'm right, Baker Company lives." He made minute adjustments to his scope, compensating for distance, wind, and the cold temperature's effect on ballistics. Spotting 300 yards. Wind 3 knots from the west. Temperature -7 degrees. Winters hesitated, then sighed and raised his binoculars. "I can't see a damn thing, but I trust your judgment. Officer target, 300 yards, wind confirmed 3 knots westerly. Temperature affecting drop by 2 inches at this range." Randall breathed slowly, controlling his heartbeat. The German officer had stopped to consult his map again, making him momentarily stationary, the perfect target. Through his enhanced scope, the thermal signature was clear, a human-shaped glow against the cold background. He exhaled halfway and squeezed the trigger. The crack of his rifle shattered the night silence. Through his scope, Randall saw the officer collapse immediately. Before the Germans could react, he rapidly cycled his bolt and fired again, taking down the radio operator. The German patrol erupted in confusion. Some men dove for cover, others fired blindly into the darkness, and a few ran back down the ravine. Without leadership or communications, their carefully planned infiltration dissolved into chaos. Randall continued firing methodically, each shot finding its target despite the darkness. 8 shots, 8 kills. The Germans, unable to determine where the fire was coming from or how they were being seen in the darkness, began to retreat in disarray. Across the valley, Baker Company had come fully alert. Flares shot into the sky, illuminating the retreating Germans, who were now exposed in open ground. American machine guns opened fire, cutting down the remaining patrol members. What had been an elite infiltration unit was now a scattered group of survivors fleeing for their lives. Winters was already breaking down their position. "We need to move immediately. Every German artillery unit in the sector will be zeroing in on this location." Randall quickly disassembled his rifle, carefully preserving the modified scope. "Baker Company is alive because we broke the rules." "Baker Company is alive because you're the luckiest shot in the European theater," Winters countered. "Or the craziest. Let's move before we find out which." They had barely cleared the ridge when German artillery began pounding their former position. As they made their way back through American lines, Randall knew he would have to explain his actions and his unauthorized equipment modifications to commanding officers who prioritized protocol over initiative. What he couldn't know was that his act of disobedience would ultimately save not just Baker Company, but possibly the entire Bastogne perimeter, as the German patrol he had stopped was the vanguard of a much larger infiltration force poised to exploit any breakthrough. The aftermath of Randall's unauthorized engagement was immediate and multifaceted. As he and Winters made their way back to the battalion command post, the night sky behind them lit up with artillery fire and flares. German units, having lost their infiltration team and the element of surprise, launched a disorganized attack that was easily repelled by the now fully alert American defenders. Captain Harold Morrison, Baker Company's commander, was waiting for them when they arrived. His expression was unreadable as Randall and Winters reported in. "You disobeyed direct orders," Morrison stated without preamble, "endangered your position, potentially compromised our entire defensive strategy, and initiated engagement without authorization." Randall stood at attention, his face betraying no emotion. "Yes, sir." "You also saved my entire company," Morrison continued, his tone softening slightly. "The patrol you engaged was leading a battalion-strength attack force. If they had breached our perimeter undetected, we would have been overrun within minutes." Winters spoke up. "Sir," Private Randall had visual confirmation of the enemy through his scope. He made a tactical judgment based on the immediate threat. Morrison's eyes narrowed. "His scope? Standard M1903A4 scopes don't function in pitch darkness, Corporal. What exactly are you saying?" There was a moment of tense silence. Randall knew that revealing his modifications could result in charges more serious than disobeying orders. Unauthorized alteration of government equipment during wartime could be construed as sabotage. Before he could respond, the battalion commander, Major Davis, entered the bunker. "I want to see the man who shot up a German patrol in the dark," he announced, "and I want to know how the hell he did it." Randall had no choice. He removed his modified scope from his pack and presented it to the officers. "Self-developed night visibility enhancement, sir. It uses phosphorescent material to detect heat signatures against cooler backgrounds. The effect is amplified by a small ultraviolet light source." Major Davis examined the device with undisguised curiosity. "You built this yourself? From what?" "Salvaged materials, sir. The phosphorescent paint came from captured German aircraft instruments. The ultraviolet light was adapted from a signal lamp. The filters were manufactured from medical X-ray film." "Where did you learn to do this kind of modification?" "Hunting in Minnesota, sir. My father and I developed similar techniques for tracking deer at night. The principles are the same, though the materials here are more advanced." Davis and Morrison exchanged glances. Finally, Davis spoke. "Normally, this kind of unauthorized modification would land you in serious trouble, Private. But these aren't normal circumstances." He handed the scope back to Randall. "Captain Morrison will write up a full report of tonight's action. In the meantime, I want you to prepare a detailed explanation of how this device works. Our technical staff will want to examine it." "Am I being charged, sir?" Randall asked directly. Davis considered for a moment. "Not at this time. The results speak for themselves. But understand this, you got lucky tonight. Disobeying orders in combat is still a serious offense, regardless of the outcome." As they left the command post, Winters muttered, "That went better than expected." Randall nodded. "They're curious about the scope. That's buying us some goodwill." "Don't get comfortable," Winters warned. "Once the immediate crisis passes, the Army has a long memory for broken regulations." Over the next 72 hours, the scope's effectiveness would be dramatically demonstrated again and again. German attempts to infiltrate American lines at night were repeatedly thwarted by Randall's ability to detect and engage targets in near-total darkness. Word spread quickly among the troops. There was a sniper who could see in the dark, and he was decimating German night patrols. Randall worked with 4 different spotters during this period, each time refining his techniques and improving the effectiveness of his modified scope. By December 23rd, he had 27 confirmed night kills, an unprecedented achievement that drew attention from regimental command. Colonel Sink summoned Randall to his headquarters on Christmas Eve. Unlike the previous encounter with battalion officers, this meeting had been formally arranged, with technical officers and intelligence personnel in attendance. Randall brought his rifle and modified scope, along with detailed notes on its construction and operation. "Private Randall," Colonel Sink began, "I've reviewed the reports of your actions over the past several days. Your unauthorized engagement on the night of December 20th potentially saved hundreds of American lives. Your continued success against enemy night operations has been remarkable." Randall remained at attention, uncertain where this was heading. "However," Sink continued, "your modifications to standard-issue equipment represent a serious breach of protocol. Under normal circumstances, such actions would result in disciplinary measures." One of the technical officers, a Major Williamson from Army Ordnance, interjected. "Colonel, if I may, I've examined Private Randall's device, and while crude, it represents an innovative approach to a critical battlefield problem. The principles he's applied could potentially be developed into more sophisticated equipment." Sink nodded. "That's precisely why I've called this meeting. Private Randall, I'm temporarily assigning you to a special technical unit. You'll work with Major Williamson to document your modifications and assist in developing improved versions for field testing." Randall was stunned. "Sir, I'm a sniper, not a technician." "You're both, apparently," Sink replied with a hint of a smile. "And right now your technical knowledge is more valuable than your marksmanship, impressive as it is. The Germans have the advantage in many areas, but if we can nullify their ability to operate under cover of darkness, it could change the entire dynamic of this campaign." Over the next 2 weeks, as the Battle of the Bulge reached its climax and then began to recede, Randall worked closely with Army technical officers to refine his night vision enhancement. They provided better materials, more precise tools, and scientific expertise that transformed his improvised modification into a more reliable and effective system. By January 19, 1945, a prototype based on Randall's design had been developed and was being field-tested by select sniper teams. The results were impressive, a 57% increase in night engagement effectiveness, with minimal additional training required. Randall was promoted to corporal and awarded the Silver Star for his actions on December 20th. The citation carefully avoided mentioning his unauthorized equipment modifications, instead emphasizing his exceptional courage and battlefield initiative in engaging superior enemy forces under adverse conditions. More significantly, the Army began to reconsider its protocols regarding equipment modifications in the field. A new directive was issued, allowing unit commanders to authorize necessary tactical adaptations to meet specific battlefield conditions, provided they were documented and reported through proper channels. For Randall personally, the experience was transformative. The skeptical professor became a respected technical advisor, his insights valued by officers who had previously dismissed him as a troublemaker. He discovered that his true talent lay not just in marksmanship, but in practical innovation, seeing problems from perspectives that traditional military thinking often overlooked. The Germans, meanwhile, were baffled by their sudden vulnerability to night operations. Intelligence reports captured after the war revealed that German command had concluded the Americans must have deployed a new type of infrared detection system, a technology that was still in its experimental stages for both sides. The truth, that a Minnesota hunter had improvised a solution using salvaged materials, was too improbable to consider. As Allied forces pushed into Germany in the spring of 1945, Randall continued to split his time between combat operations and technical development. His modified scopes, now manufactured in limited quantities by Army Ordnance, were distributed to sniper teams throughout the European theatre. By the war's end, over 300 German night casualties were attributed to snipers, using what became unofficially known as the Randall system. When victory in Europe was declared on May 8, 1945, Randall was stationed near Munich with an advanced technical unit. He had received orders to prepare for deployment to the Pacific Theatre, where his night vision enhancements would be particularly valuable in jungle warfare. The Japanese surrender in August made this deployment unnecessary, and Randall was honorably discharged in October 1945, having served 2 years and 7 months. Unlike many veterans who spoke little of their wartime experiences, Randall was surprisingly open about his service when he returned to Clearwater. He didn't dwell on the killing. He had taken 73 enemy lives during his tour, but instead focused on the technical challenges he had overcome and the lessons learned about institutional resistance to innovation. He married his hometown sweetheart, Eleanor Mitchell, in November 1945. Using his technical experience and veterans' benefits, he enrolled in engineering courses at the University of Minnesota. By 1950, he had earned a degree in optical engineering and found employment with a manufacturing company that specialized in hunting and sporting equipment. The most significant aspect of Randall's post-war life was his continued innovation in optical systems. In 1952, he patented a civilian hunting scope that incorporated principles similar to his wartime modification, though using more sophisticated materials. This became the foundation for Randall Optics, a company he founded in 1955 that specialized in low-light visibility equipment for both civilian and military applications. The company remained small but highly respected within its niche. Randall deliberately avoided major military contracts, preferring to focus on practical applications for hunters, wildlife researchers, and search and rescue teams. "I've seen what happens when innovation gets swallowed by bureaucracy," he explained in a 1968 interview. "Sometimes the best solutions come from outside the system." Throughout the 1950s and 60s, Randall maintained correspondence with several members of his former unit, including James Winters, who had become a police officer in Chicago. Their letters often reflected on how their wartime experiences had shaped their approach to problems and authority. "What I remember most," Winters wrote in 1963, "is how certain everyone was that you were wrong, right up until the moment you proved you were right. It taught me to question assumptions, even when they come from experts." In 1971, 27 years after the Battle of the Bulge, Randall received an unexpected letter from the United States Army Infantry School at Fort Benning. They were developing a new curriculum on battlefield innovation and adaptability, and his case study, now declassified, was being included as an example of how initiative and technical improvisation could overcome seemingly insurmountable tactical challenges. The letter included statements from survivors of Baker Company, many of whom had never known the full story of how they had been saved that December night. One letter from former Private Edward Collins was particularly moving. "I had 3 children and 7 grandchildren after the war. None of them would exist if you hadn't seen what nobody else could see and done what nobody else would do. I've told them all about the night an angel with a rifle watched over us." Randall was invited to speak at the infantry school in 1972, where he addressed a class of officer candidates about the balance between discipline and initiative in combat situations. "Rules exist for good reasons," he told them, "but circumstances sometimes arise where following the rules leads to disaster. The challenge is knowing the difference and having the courage to act when lives are at stake." This philosophy became increasingly integrated into military training throughout the 1970s and 80s. Rand Corporation studies of battlefield innovation cited the Randall incident as a textbook example of how frontline adaptability could overcome technological limitations and doctrinal rigidity. More broadly, Randall's story became part of military folklore, one of those semi-legendary tales that instructors share with new recruits to illustrate that sometimes the right thing and the regulation thing aren't the same thing. The technical aspects of his innovation were eventually superseded by true electronic night vision devices, but the principle remained relevant. Sometimes the best solution isn't in the manual. Randall died peacefully in 1993 at the age of 70, surrounded by his family. His obituary in the Minneapolis Star-Tribune mentioned his Silver Star and his successful business, but not the full story of his wartime innovation. That story continued to circulate within military circles, occasionally appearing in specialized publications, but rarely reaching the general public. It wasn't until 2018, 74 years after the Battle of the Bulge, that a comprehensive account was published. Military historian Robert Carlson's book, Invisible Victories: Unauthorized Innovation in World War II, dedicated an entire chapter to Randall's night vision enhancement and its impact on tactical doctrine. Using declassified documents and interviews with surviving veterans, Carlson presented the most complete picture yet of how one soldier's willingness to break the rules potentially changed the course of a pivotal battle. The book revealed that Randall's modifications had directly influenced post-war research into night vision technology. Several of the scientists involved in developing the first generation of electronic night vision devices in the 1950s had examined Randall's work and incorporated elements of his approach, particularly regarding the detection of thermal variations. This connection had been classified for decades due to the sensitive nature of the technology. Most poignantly, Carlson discovered that German records captured after the war included a special directive issued on December 28, 1944, ordering all night operations in the Bastogne sector to be suspended indefinitely. The reason cited was unexplained American capability to engage targets in complete darkness with unprecedented accuracy. This directive effectively eliminated one of the Germans' key tactical advantages during the critical phase of the battle, when weather conditions were preventing Allied air support. In the years following Carlson's book, interest in Randall's story grew. Documentary filmmakers, military academies, and corporate leadership programs all found valuable lessons in the tale of a young soldier who trusted his judgment over established protocol and saved countless lives in the process. Perhaps the most fitting tribute came in 2020, when the United States Army Night Vision and Electronic Sensors Directorate at Fort Belvoir, Virginia, named their innovation laboratory after Thomas Randall. The plaque at the entrance bears a quote from his 1972 speech at Fort Benning. "The greatest threat in combat isn't the enemy's strength, but our inability to see beyond our own limitations." The story of Thomas Randall offers a profound lesson that resonates far beyond military history. In moments of crisis, the courage to challenge established norms, to see what others cannot or will not see, can literally mean the difference between life and death. His experience reminds us that rules and protocols, however well-intentioned, are created based on known conditions and available technology. When circumstances change, sometimes only those on the front lines can recognize the need for adaptation. The most striking aspect of Randall's innovation wasn't just its technical ingenuity, but the moral courage it required. Facing the possibility of court-martial and disgrace, he chose to trust his own judgment over institutional wisdom. He risked his career to save lives that established protocol would have sacrificed. This tension between individual initiative and institutional control remains relevant today, not just in military contexts, but in any hierarchical organization facing complex, rapidly changing challenges. When should we follow established procedures, and when should we break them? How do we balance the need for standardization and coordination with the value of frontline innovation? These questions have no simple answers, but Randall's story suggests that sometimes the person who sees the truth most clearly is the one willing to look beyond accepted limitations. What shocked you most about this story? Was it the fact that a simple hunting technique adapted for warfare saved hundreds of lives? Or perhaps the revelation that military bureaucracy initially resisted an innovation that later became standard practice? Or maybe it was learning that one person's willingness to risk everything, career, reputation, freedom, could alter the course of a pivotal World War II battle. The courage to see differently, to act when others hesitate, to risk everything for what you know is right. These are the qualities that transform ordinary people into heroes whose impact echoes across generations. Thomas Randall's legacy lives not just in the lives he saved on that frigid December night, but in every instance where someone finds the courage to trust their own vision when the world insists they cannot possibly see what they claim to see. If this story moved you, share it with someone who appreciates how individual courage and innovation can overcome seemingly impossible odds.